Salam, Tep, Nani, Bandele Elamine. Once again, we're here with Brother Keng El Bey, my brother, and we're going to be discussing jurisdiction and also the disenfranchisement of the so-called blacks. So, go ahead and get into it, man. Let's get on to jurisdiction. What you want to discuss on that?
I want to talk about jurisdiction in a way that a lot of us don't know how to associate jurisdiction. We have to look at why America is incorporated. They incorporate everything in a way that they have different institutions that deal with different functions, and these institutions have primary goals. They have objectives. So when we dealing with corporation, you have to look at how jurisdiction is gained. It's all about relationships. People got to understand it's about relationships and how relationship works through written dialogue. Like a birth certificate, it helps establish a certain status so that certain jurisdictional issues can be raised within that state. So like the birth record or birth certificate, what they call it, will have you born within that particular state. And that state will have exclusive jurisdiction most of the time, and especially if they already had established a court hearing and that the child was born within that state and they had established a court hearing in that state, then you have to go back and to that original jurisdiction to try to move it out of that jurisdiction. And then we're talking about driver's license and things like that. We got to look at people understand the contract thing, but a lot of people, I think they're missing the big picture and how everything is incorporated to associate you with the jurisdiction in which a specific institution will gain jurisdiction based upon, like if you file in bankruptcy, you have to go to a bankruptcy court and so forth and so on. The interesting thing about I want people to understand is that when you incorporate, you got to understand that a corporation has a specific goal, and they have a specific target market in which they are exclusively trying to appeal to. When we understand these components and how corporations work, then we can better have insight on why what we call melanated people or black people or African American or whatever you call yourself, how we're disenfranchised by the corporations. We have to remember that when these corporations were set up, and even the Constitution, the so-called black man was not included. They didn't incorporate these corporations to have any liberal interest for people of color. So when we go to court, when we go to different institutions, let's say when you get a traffic ticket, and say you got a DUI, and you go to the public, they assign you a public defender. The issue becomes this: it was never designed for the public interest at mind, because they give you a public defender out of a public defender's office, and his job is to deal with the general public. That's what the public defender's office is for, to deal with the public defender's office. But they're not well staffed like the police department, the FBI, the DEA, and all these other associations or subsidiary agencies that's associated with different governmental branches. The public defender's office is not well funded like that. You're not going to have a team of attorneys that's going to go in and work in the public interest like that. So when we go in there, we're already doomed because we don't have the resources. So when you get a public defender, he's probably overworked, been late, staying up late, working on different cases, and he has to then pick his battles. He has to see, like, man, could I really work this case appropriately? He has to then decide what's the best for him, because he has a whole lot of cases that he has to work on, and he has to work on them in a limited amount of time. So I just wanted to show you how, in relationship, how disenfranchised work, because when you disenfranchise, you do not have an institution that really, or multitudes of institutions that have a specific goal in mind for people of color, people who are melanated. They don't have banks, a whole lot of institutions that's really to cater or target your business or really want your services. So I'm not surprised that there is mass incarceration, high employment rates. These are things that's associated with disenfranchisement, because we were never, they never had us in mind for any of this thing that they call corporate America. So capitalism is at its finest, at its peak, because it understands how to make capital by limiting those who have the ability, by eliminating those to have the ability to create wealth and keep you in debt. So you got to understand, disenfranchisement plays a big part in the infrastructure and how this political legal system work. And it's all done through corporations. And just like the court, you got to understand, you're looking at nothing but a corporation that deals in legalities. It deals with specifics on law. And that's what it was designed to do. And that's its sole function. And you got to remember, if the court don't have litigants, what purpose would it serve? If it doesn't have litigants, if it doesn't have people going to jail, what purpose would it serve? And you got to remember this: who is their targeting? Who is their target market? Every business, I learned in economics that every business you got to have a specific target market. And who are they chasing after? They're in the business of locking people up. They're in the business of law enforcement. Who are they really enforcing the law on? And why is this happening? So I try to tell people it's bigger than just the legal system. We have to understand about this thing called corporate America, and we have to look at disenfranchisement overall and see why we're not included in corporate America like we should be. Now, in relationship to jurisdiction again, like I said, you got to understand how jurisdiction is established. We understand there's three jurisdictions: personal, subject matter, and territory. We got to understand the relationships in between those and how things are incorporated with that, and how jurisdiction is established, especially on subject matter jurisdiction. I want to talk about subject matter jurisdiction a little bit more, because some of the statutes, if you looked at some of the statutes within your state, some of the statutes are a little vague, and they may not be specific. If you look at some statutes, a lot of different things can fall under those categories and how the wording plays out. And what they do is they create a circumstance, or they create a situation to allow a subject matter to have prevalence. And your job is to create a story or a circumstance in order to take you out of that jurisdiction. A lot of people don't understand how all this stuff works. And you have to look at due process plays in, it's like a belt that holds up jurisdiction. Due process it's the belt that hold up jurisdiction, because certain things have to be performed before jurisdiction can ever be established or maintained. So you have to understand, when you're looking at application of law, what have the Supreme Court has put specific rules and specific things that must be performed in order for jurisdiction to be applied under that statute. Because some statutes are a little too vague, some statutes are not very clear, and the public may not have a clear understanding of that statute. So you have to sometimes reference the statute to a court that will better explain how that statute could be applied and what things that need to be performed in order for that statute to be applied in the manner in which law enforcement or the prosecutor is trying to place the charge on the individual. So I think a lot of people just have to understand the complexities of this infrastructure and what I call the machinery to really be able to navigate through this process and be able to have a better understanding on what they need to be doing and how they need to be thinking and performing in the courtroom, so that when you go to court, you don't be what I call legally dead, meaning that you have no legal understanding, that you're really dead in society based upon having any legal understanding. Because if you're legally dead, you don't know what to ask, what questions to ask, you don't know what to do, you don't know what your attorney have done, you don't know what to fight for, you don't know how to raise certain issues and to develop your case in a way where you can find a way to have your case heard, but not just be heard, but have an effective remedy that may have a resolution for you that can better suit your needs. So you have to be very cunning in this process, but you really need to understand the full scope. Like a lot of people don't know about scope of practice for judges, attorneys, and different stuff. Looking at the judicial canons and understanding the attorney's job under the professional rules of conduct and so forth and so on. You have to understand these rules also, because these rules also apply to jurisdiction. In order for a person to maintain and establish certain jurisdiction, you also have to follow certain rules. But there are certain guidelines for certain applications of law to be applied in order to establish jurisdiction. So when we talk about jurisdiction, it can be very complex, and you have to understand a lot of this stuff on what I call the machinery from the whole process, because it's a fine-tuned machine. Law is not based on science. It's not a true, accurate science. It's more or less of a form of expression, in a sense where they get to call all the shots and make all the rules. Me and you cannot really get to decide what the law is. You have the Supreme Court. You know, if it's a true science, then everyone has a right to input or influence in a way to make it better suited for understanding. But only they have that power to suit the understanding. They only the ones who get to decide what the law is. So we're very limited in our power to deal with legalities. But you have to understand the components of it, and you have to be with it enough to ensure that what you're doing and the integrity of what you're doing will come in a way where it be effective for you and for others to follow behind you by establishing a precedence. So I just wanted people to understand when I talk about the machinery, due process, and jurisdiction, and how how all this stuff ties in together.
Like due process. Can you elaborate a little bit more on due process?
You have procedural due process and you have substantive due process. Due process is kind of tricky. When we're dealing with applications of law, you have certain rules that's established by the court. You have certain issues that is established in which you have to follow. There are certain constitutional requirements that each application or each process of law have to meet. If they fail to meet certain standards, then it can be considered maybe a substantive due process right. That's just like they can't take away something without giving you proper notice. That would be a substantive right, because like sometimes even some of these state laws or state things that they're doing within the state, they have to make the public aware of these things are going on. And when they don't let the public know, or they do something in secrecy and it's not in the best interest of the public, then you can challenge that if it meet constitutional muster by failing to inform the general public of their actions and what's going on, where the general public is totally unaware of the existence of a certain law or a certain, like, let's say, a camera in which they are, or they don't have no, let you know that these cameras are in these specific areas and locations. They have to alert the public to what they're doing, and when they fail to do that, that could be considered a due process issue. Now, I mean, under substantive right, procedurally, they have to. We pretty much know that there's specific procedures or rules they must follow in order to establish and maintain jurisdiction. Things can be procedurally not performed. There's rules also that's also well established, and they might have to follow particular rules in order to maintain jurisdiction. Like, say, for example, if you file a motion for discovery and they fail to comply with the motion to discovery within the time prescribed by that rule, then jurisdiction could be lost with prejudice due to the fact that they failed to comply with the rules, and they have to have a good reason why they didn't comply with the rule. It had to be something that's very what they call extraordinary in order for that to be considered, for that action to even be considered, because you have to follow the rules. A lot of people, even with the sovereign movement, a lot of them don't follow the rules, and then they wonder why they're barred. They bar themselves timely because everything is time sensitive, or they're just not following the law, or not doing things in an appropriate manner to have appropriate dialogue with the proper institution to maintain the integrity of something, or show that they had a right to exercise this in a way that it fits their right to be able to exercise this. They could have a right to do it, but they may just be going about it totally wrong, where it's not going to have any type of leverage in court at all. Well, I think there's one thing I need to address too. I hear a lot of controversy about common law versus statutory law. I think a lot of people are confused about common law and statutory law, and how to really exercise either or. Exercise of common law would be mostly your case law that deals with a way to maybe deal with a particular situation, circumstance, according to a specific application of law, and then that becomes the new precedent or a new standard in which, in order to operate that law under statutory law, these requirements, or what they call prerequisites, or necessary before you can exercise that application of law, before the government on the state or federal level can exercise that law. But also, common law is kind of unique in the sense that you can set a new precedence based upon certain circumstances about a specific application of law. You can go to court and make an argument saying that this is common law, that whatever the statute is violates your right to exercise certain things, and that they're taking away a choice or a specific way of life in which is forbidden for any government to do with under constitutional muster. So you can go in there and make argument on that. It doesn't mean that you have a right to exercise that until the court give you the power to do so, until they make a ruling. Now it's set in stone under case law. Now you can set a standard, a new precedence, but it's not official until the courts make a decision on it. But you have a right to debate with the court on certain issues and say that you have a right to do this, but you have to prove, you have to show them that you have a right to do this. And it's not official until the Supreme Court makes it official, or the court itself makes it official, or the appellate court makes it official. Then there could be a new argument in which you can say, or whatever, whoever you are, you can, if your name is Tony, it can be the Tony rule or the Tony law in which you can come under. People may have relief under the Tony rule, in which they're making an argument for whatever the circumstances may be, and that you can say that the Tony rule may apply under that. So a lot of people are very unaware how statutory and common law really works. And all we're just saying is really common law is really, we're talking about some case law, and then your statutory law is what was passed by legislation. So we're talking about ones that's law that's given by the court, and then ones passed by legislation. They go through that's a different type of process, that the processing is different. So you got to understand the process and how this works. So a lot of people get it wrong, think they can just go out there and exercise a common law right. What you may think is right may not be right for everyone else. You have to show and prove that this is a right that you have to, and the court has to make it official by ruling on that. They could deny your argument, and now it's unofficial, and now you don't have a right to exercise that. So you got to be careful on what you're doing and what you're saying about understanding common law, because common law is not what a lot of people think it is, and they have to understand how to deal with this effectively and appropriately. And dealing with statutory law, statutory can affect the common law right. Let's not get this wrong. You know, they have a lot of statutes that's really forbidden for them to do, but nobody ever challenged the integrity of that application to ensure that that application must meet certain standards before it can be applied. A lot of people don't understand how to do that. So I just wanted to emphasize that on common law versus statutory law, so people can be more educated on how to deal with that. So is there any more questions?
No, my brother. Appreciate everything you said.